Well, hey, I'm Phil Heimlich. This is what we call Sanity Check. I'm a former city council member, county commissioner, assistant prosecutor in Cincinnati, and I've got the pleasure of having Bill Kristol on today. Bill's a pretty prominent, prestigious guy. For those of you who aren't into politics, he's worked for more presidents than I've even known, I think. He's been known as one of the great leaders in the kind of conservative or neoconservative movement, and he's been on every TV and talk show and hosted that you could imagine. And well, Bill, thanks for being here. I appreciate it.
Well, thanks for those nice words. It's good to be with you, Phil.
Well, real quick, your father, Irving Kristol, was known as I believe, described as the godfather of neoconservatism. And he was a prominent intellectual and so forth. Real quick, how do you define neoconservatism?
I mean, he once quipped in the
I'm talking about
70s.
in terms of you more than him, but go
Yeah,
ahead.
I mean,
That's what I'm thinking.
regionally, it was kind of more of a domestic policy thing almost, and it was liberals who were believed in civil rights, believed in the kind of Kennedy Johnson kind of liberalism, not really Goldwater people, but who liberals who, as my father once joked, got mugged by reality and decided that some of these liberal programs had good intentions but didn't work very well. Free markets worked better, and they moved to the right in the 70s, and the Democratic Party moved to the left when McGovern. So it was foreign policy as well as domestic policy. And they were kind of Hubert Humphrey, Scoop Jackson Democrats, and then became basically Reagan Republicans. In the 90s and 2000s, I don't quite know why, honestly, this happened. It became much more identified with foreign policy alone as a kind of strong U.S. leadership in the world, but also democracy promotion and fighting the war on terror, but also trying to promote democracy in the Middle East and elsewhere, which obviously had sort of mixed results. But
To some degree, involved in regime change or attempted regime change.
yeah,
Is
well,
that fair to
obviously in
say?
Iraq and I guess Afghanistan too, and then obviously welcoming the regime change in places like Ukraine, actually way back when that happened, and Georgia and some of the former Soviet republics. So, as well as in Asia, they're pretty good democracies there, Taiwan and stuff. So, yeah, very much of a kind of post World War II American leadership around the world, both strong military, but also Marshall Plan type stuff and strong economic and free trade. So, yeah, what is now attacked as globalism? That's kind of what it was.
Got it. All right, you've worked for a couple presidents and vice. I want to throw out just one name after another. Give me just a quick
Okay.
description. Right, okay, Richard Nixon. You were in his White House.
I mean,
I mean, quick description from
I
your
was a
point of view,
17-year-old intern in that White House for 2 months.
Okay.
I met him once. I mean, Nixon was a talented and intelligent man, but character matters, and his character turned
Yeah.
out to be pretty flawed.
Yes, that's a great description. All right, H.R. Bush. He, okay, I know you were the head of staff of the vice president, Dan Quayle.
Right.
I'll talk about him in a minute. Your quick impression of George H.R. Bush.
I mean, he was impressive, really focused on foreign policy, did a great job of ending the Cold War with almost not a shot being fired, and then kicking Saddam out of Kuwait, which I think helped stabilize the post-Cold War era for quite a while, for some while at least. Got no credit for any of this because the voters decided they wanted to move on to domestic policy, I guess understandably, after the end of the Cold War. But that was, I think, the last of the Cold War presidents, and also obviously the last president who served in World War II, was shot down as a very young man,
Yeah.
and
Yes.
ends up being president of the United States. Yeah.
You know what I most admired about him during the fall of the Berlin Wall? He intentionally did nothing. He didn't go over there to try to grab the glory like Trump would have. He recognized that he didn't want to inject himself, and I thought that was a very patriotic approach to that.
A real state. I mean, he was a statesman on foreign policy, on domestic policy, like everyone. He, had his issue,
Yeah.
exploited some issues and so forth. But and honestly, just didn't care. He thought the job of the president was to be the national security leader of the country. Domestic policy, Congress did a lot of that. The states did a lot of that. I think that was not a bad model. But by the time Clinton came along in '92, voters wanted a little more focus on domestic policy. So for me, it was a very important growing. I mean, I was 38, 39, 40 at the time, but an important lesson, a reminder more than a lesson, maybe that electorates don't always reward good performance, right? George H.W. Bush was a
True.
good president,
It's a
and
good
he
point.
got clobbered in 1992.
Yeah. All right, you were chief of staff of Dan Quayle. You were described as Dan Quayle's brain. For those younger people out there, Dan Quayle reputation of frankly not being what do they call it, the smartest tack in the drawer or whatever. Just give us the scoop on that.
I mean,
Bill, since you're
so
comfortable.
He had a very
You
he was a
as the one as being described as his brain,
No, that
you
was
have a
ridiculous.
responsibility.
That
All
was
right, but
ridiculous.
anyway,
I do, yeah.
yeah.
I mean, he defeated an incumbent Democrat in '76 in a congressional race in Indiana. He defeated an incumbent Democratic Senator Birch by a popular one in 1980. Very talented politician and an intelligent man and patriotic and a man who cared about the country. Had a horrible campaign in '88 when they picked him. Didn't really prepare him. Didn't prepare the media for vice president. Kind of suddenly. And that was very hard to shake that reputation of malapropisms and sort of not being up to it. He was a good, responsible vice president. Did a lot of things behind the scenes that no one talked about much. Loyal to President Bush, and a good lesson for me also that the public image isn't always the same as the private reality.
That's a great point. All right, let's move on. Hillary Clinton's health care plan. You were one of the leaders in defeating that. I think it's fair to say, at least, that prior, at least I would say prior to Obamacare, that if someone had a pre-existing condition, a serious condition, they didn't work for it, were self-employed, they could be in real trouble. They could lose everything financially. I'm assuming that I don't remember too much about it, that Hillary's plan was designed to do something about this. Tell us real quick, what was her plan and why were you so committed to defeating it?
I mean, it was a long time ago, right? I don't think, weirdly, her plan was not like Obamacare, which to its credit, maybe you can criticize. Obviously, I was not thrilled with the way they rolled that out either and some aspects of it, but that wasn't designed to address a real problem, which is the one you just specified. If you're on the individual market, it was hard to get insurance if you had a pre-existing condition. And corporate, obviously, you're part of a pool, and it doesn't matter. It's not disqualifying. You don't pay any more than anyone else at the company, right? Um, s- Hillary Care was much more about HMOs and about sort of rationalizing medicine. I think it would have done damage to the American tradition of doctors, patients, and doctors and their relationships. I think Obamacare was actually better than Hillary Care. Yeah.
Yeah, I actually think it's been pretty good. Everything else been equal, but okay. Now, the issue, one of your major issues, as we kind of touched on, was regime. You are known as the regime change guy, I would say. Now, I look back and I look at our adventure, what we did in Iran in the '50s and Chile in the '70s, and seems to me that we sent the CIA in, overthrew these democratic governments and installed a despot who brutalized the country for 20, 30 years. Maybe that's too simple. But so I lean against those kind of efforts. Let's talk about Iraq. Okay, you were one of the strongest proponents of the Iraq war. Tell us about the two reasons that were given and which didn't pan out. The fact that they said that he had weapons of mass destruction and that he was tied to Al Qaeda. Those are the reasons that were advanced, turned out not to be true. How do you respond to that?
I mean, people believe them to be true, and including Bill Clinton in 1998 when he bombed Saddam and maybe
But that's
destroyed.
not the point. If they people believed, right? I mean, because you were in a position of advising whether to
Yeah, but
do
I
it or
had no.
not.
I mean, I had no
Okay.
access to classified information, and if the
Okay.
CIA tells you something, and Colin Powell tells you something, you believe it. And so
Yeah.
I thought the threats
All
were real.
right.
He had been trying to develop weapons of mass destruction back in '91 when
Right.
George H.W. Bush went in and kicked him out of Kuwait. So I don't think it was unreasonable to be worried about that. It was post 9/11, obviously. We were too ambitious, too optimistic, probably about being able to really establish a stable regime in Iraq. Though I was with McCain, not with Rumsfeld and Bush, and sort of going in without. We thought they went in without enough troops. We were more the Petraeus side of let's do a serious counterinsurgency. I think that might have made a big difference if we had done that back in 2003. But you can't rewrite history. Iraq is better off today than when Saddam was there, who was an unbelievably brutal dictator. But getting there, I mean, it was a very difficult war, obviously, and yeah, you're right. I mean, the main justifications for it just turned out not to be true, and you can't really wish that away.
Yeah. The last I read, there were 460,000 deaths from that. Plus, when you say it's better off, I think you also have to agree that the Islamic State, I believe, came out of that or from Saddam's army, and the damage and deaths they caused is unbelievable. So looking back on that, given those consequences, I know it's a hard question, but uh, would it have been better to leave him in place as bad as he was than to go in there and have hundreds of thousands of deaths?
I mean, Saddam caused hundreds of thousands of deaths while he was in power. But yes, no, none of us would have been for the war if we had known that there were not weapons of mass destruction being developed, and also that if we had known that it would be carried out, frankly, incompetently, I believe, by the Bush administration. I mean, they were trying to do the right thing, but so no, it was. Now, having said that, I think people overstated. I mean, the deaths were terrible. Uh, as I say, though, Saddam had been such a butcher as well. Everyone said it would destabilize the Middle East. That didn't really happen. The destabilization came later with Syria, with this in
Well, it
2015.
doesn't didn't the Islamic State
That
disable,
also came
and
up
that was a
after.
result of
Well, to some
invasion of Iraq,
degree,
wasn't
but to
it?
some
Okay,
degree, but
all
we
right,
crushed that honestly pretty quickly.
yeah, good.
And the big destabilization was 2015 when Syria fell apart and we didn't intervene. So all I would say is this: as many people died in Syria, 500,000 people, as in Iraq.
Yeah,
Non-intervention has a price as well as intervention. These are tough choices to make, obviously in real time. No, I wish we hadn't gone in. I wish but we still would have had to contain him. It's not like we would have sort of sat around. He would have developed
hmm,
weapons of mass destruction. He had
okay,
tried before. If we had inspectors there, the inspectors were being kicked out. I mean, there was a
yeah,
huge ongoing saga. It wasn't like Bush woke up one day in 2002 and said, "Let's invade Iraq," you know. So
yeah.
it would have been a huge headache in any case.
Right. Last one. Well, actually, the last one, except for the current situation, Libya. You you backed Obama's decision to essentially go in and take him out or contribute to it. Isn't that country now worse? Is again similar situation, horrible, brutal dictator. My understanding is the country's totally lawless, armed militias, no effective governors, deteriorating quality of life, even compared to when Gaddafi was there. Any uh,
You can't go into these
same
things.
question.
I mean, I think we were right in the sense that if you're going to go in, you have to be serious and you have to maybe be willing to deploy troops. You have to keep people there for a while. You have to do what we did in the Balkans, for example, where we kept
Yeah.
peacekeepers and got Europeans to put peacekeepers in for
Right.
over a decade. And it's not perfect
That
there,
was
but
less regime change than preventing really genocide,
well,
wasn't it? As far
Milosevic,
as
we got deposed though, so
yeah,
I mean, it
okay,
was regime
okay,
change in Serbia,
good.
and so I think, yeah, but again, doing it half-heartedly, this is what worries me the most about Venezuela. Even if you magically got Maduro out, what do we were not interested in going in and trying to help stabilize the place, and Trump has gutted all of our instruments of diplomatic and economic power, the State Department and USAID. So I agree, it's irresponsible to go in if you don't have a plan for how you're going to
And
hopefully
would
at
you say
least.
I was just gonna that's my next question, Venezuela. Is that a similar situation? I mean, it looks like he wants to or is trying to invade, and he's trying to do what he supposedly was always against. Does that apply to your point? They don't really know what they're going to do with it. Would you agree it's better? Forgetting even the issue of killing the people on the speedboats, which is very questionable, but this whole idea of massing this armada there and threatening to go in. Your
I
thoughts?
mean, maybe they'll get lucky and Maduro will, will panic and leave and we'll
Hmm.
have a better government. But again, if you're going to be serious about these things in the world, you need to be ready to have a full, effort to try to make things better. I'm not convinced the Trump administration is. I can't believe Trump's really going to go in a big way because the one lesson Trump in his kind of lizard brain, I think, has learned watching American
Yeah.
politics is for 50 years is what we were just talking about, which is presidents don't end up in very good shape politically when they've intervened in foreign countries typically. Even George H.W. Bush, who had the successful intervention in the first Gulf War, it didn't end up helping him so politically, and Trump cares about his political standing. I've been surprised that Trump has let people push him as far as they've pushed him towards intervening in Venezuela.
Yeah.
I don't like Maduro, and if we could have and look, there are plenty of diplomatic ways and other ways we can work for regime change, and sometimes it works, and sometimes it doesn't work, and you hope it'll work eventually. But no, I think it's very imprudent what he's doing now, and risky actually, and not thought through. We're not set up to do any of the things you would have to do if you start bombing targets in Venezuela. Even the speedboats.
Yep.
I mean, leaving aside the legality, which is very
Yeah.
questionable, and the
Exactly.
humanitarian side
Yes.
of it,
Yes.
we're causing, no country in South America or Central America is going to work with us. I think the price we're paying beneath the surface for even that kind of foolish, kind of macho demonstration
Right.
of
Right.
power, that price could end up being pretty great.
Well said. All right, let's jump to 2016. Okay, you've been a conservative Republican like I consider myself to be. You didn't just oppose Trump in the primary, you have become a leader among those of us who are the kind of Republican conservatives in opposition to Trump. What led you to make that decision to really jump in full feed in that.
I just thought he really would be not only a bad president, but a dangerous one in the sense that I didn't agree with his policies, protectionism, isolationism, nativism,
Right.
the anti-immigration stuff, all that. But okay, you don't agree with someone's policies, you can survive 4 years. The country can't, even 8 years of that. Um, I thought he really didn't have the character to be a decent president, and I thought he had real authoritarian aspirations. And that part, I think I was right about, and I think we're seeing that in spades now
I think you're right about all of it.
in the second term. Yeah. So I think, but I'd say for me, the never Trump thing was I would have been against Trump, but I wouldn't have been never Trump, if you want to use these phrases, in the sense that because unless I had thought that he really was a danger to our democracy, not just someone who would hamper economic growth or do some foolish things in foreign policy.
But you continued, not just when he was running, you continued in his first term, I think, to be a strong spokesperson against him and what he was doing. Um, what was it that he did in his first term that first most concerns you, and what repercussions were there to you professionally, to your family, for having taken such a strong stance against the Republican leader of the Republican Party?
And the president, yeah. Well, I mean, the first term, I think some things didn't go as badly as I expected, partly because good people went in and tried to mitigate the damage. And I was for them doing it. And I was anti-Trump, but I privately talked to some people, mostly at the second and third tier, a couple of the top people, though. And I thought, you know what, if you can go in and make things less bad in foreign policy and in some important areas in domestic policy, that's worth doing. So I was not so anti-Trump that I didn't think we could, it was worth mitigating the damage. I do think that, in a lot of areas, I mean, mostly, again, the beginning of the destruction of the institutions, the politicization of everything under Trump began in the first term. It was curbed by the people he had in there, though. But the demagoguery and all that was dangerous. After January 6th, he obviously tried to reverse the election results. That sort of proved, I think, the point that he wasn't committed to the peaceful transfer of power into American democracy. I hoped for a minute there that that might be the end. It wasn't. He came back. Very successful, I got to say, politically. He won the nomination, won the election. I always thought the second term would be extremely dangerous because there he had loyalists in. He didn't have Jim Mattis and Mark Esper. He didn't have even Bill Barr, whatever one thinks of him, or Jeff Sessions. He didn't have John Kelly. He didn't have people who were trying to keep things at least somewhat reasonable and decent. And now we've had
What do
nine
they say
months.
about to heart keep his worst instincts, to control his
Yeah.
worst instincts, is the way it's described?
Yeah, and who knew how the government worked and could try to get the system to kind of function, even with with a kooky guy at the top and so forth. But the second term has been very bad. I got to say, especially in domestic policy, almost worse than even I expected. The firing of senior military officers, the mass deportation agenda, what's happening at the Justice Department. It's going to take the country a long time to recover from some of that.
Yeah. What do you think the greatest threats are in terms of what his next steps are going to be? I mean, he's only been in there for what, less than a year. As you mentioned, he blacklisted law firms. He's basically gotten universities to kneel to him in many cases. And one of my schools I went to, University of Virginia Law School, has been involved with the. I think he got them to fire their president, and
Right.
this whole idea of controlling academic freedom. Of course, the deportations, especially the fact that so many of the people were people without criminal records. All these things to me are very scary, and humanly speaking, am not optimistic about what's next. You have any idea what do you think the next steps will be, if any, he'll
So
take?
just on the optimism front, I think the one good piece of good news is this stuff isn't working out very well, and it's not very popular. So that may be a
Yeah.
bit of a that may stop him ultimately. No, I think it's a combination of the Justice Department, the FBI, DHS, the kind of the way in which the power agencies of the government are been politicized, personalized. To say nothing of all the corruption and the grift, and so we really, will the rule of law be strong in America 3 years from now? That's an open question. I don't think in our lifetime we've ever really worried about that. We've disliked particular decisions. Watergate was a challenge, but that worked out. He got removed from office, and they passed a lot of reforms to try to strengthen some of the barriers. Will those guardrails that we've taken for granted for so many years, military following orders and being responsible, and not being totally politicized in their promotions, Justice Department, all these ICE characters on, being recruited with white nationalist advertising campaigns, and then coming in and rounding up people with dark skins. I mean, I feel like that's a level All of that
Level we've
together.
never seen before, even in with the history of this country.
Yeah, maybe in the South, obviously, with
Yeah.
exceptionally, but I thought we had gotten beyond that, and that's been depressing. I agree with you, and that part I find personally just so demoralizing. Really, one has to fight back, and one has to not be demoralized. But to see how many people have fallen into that and gone along with it and accommodated it, and the business leaders, university leaders, the law firms, intellectual types, even just kind of deciding, well, this is the future. I guess I just have to work with it and get along with it. That's the I
That's what
admire people
happened
like you who've
historically
tried to
without
fight.
it.
I admire
Oh,
anyone who's tried to fight it,
thank
and
you.
people run for office and you don't win, and people say, why'd you do it? But you know what? I feel like we got to do our best, right?
You know what you said there kind of reminds me historically of whether we're talking about Germany or any other country. Unfortunately, same thing. Majority of business community, legal community, et cetera, tends to go along rationalizing. Let's talk about last thing. Last thing I want to ask you about 2028. My feeling is that, assuming he is alive and relatively cognitive, I don't think the guy's going to want to leave office. I know he didn't want to leave, and think of Bill Maher was predicting he doesn't want to leave. He's not going to leave, and he was right about that. Okay, I can't see this guy just walking away in 2028. Gavin Newsom talked about the fact that he's sending all the troops in the streets, and he said to the military, "This is a kind of a practice for you." The the thing Newsom brought up, which I think is very real, is that somehow he declares martial law, calls off the election, does something to stay in power. Am I becoming kind of crazy about that, or is that a real threat?
Oh, it's a real threat, and I think maybe he doesn't call martial law, invoke martial law, but he puts a huge amount of number of thumbs in the scales to tilt the electoral field beforehand in all kinds of ways, including by sending troops into cities and saying that we can't have elections in this neighborhood because there's so much violence, or we can't count the ballots correctly. I mean, you can imagine all kinds of things both before and after the election. Uh, no, I don't think he's look. A couple of things I'd say. It seems to me like the attitude of him, but also all of his senior people, is not, we're going to do our best for 4 years, and if we get voted out, we get voted out. That's not the way they're behaving. They're trying to do everything they can to cement their hold on all these institutions for a long time in the future. A and B, the corruption means that they can't afford to lose. And it's not just Trump. I think this is a big difference from the first term. Trump didn't want to get leave. But how many senior people in this administration, they didn't, some of them went along with him in his horrible January 6th plans. But a lot of them were like, okay, I'm going to leave and I'll go, to a law firm back, or go to business or whatever. And this time, there's been so much corruption, so deep, so widespread, so flagrant. There are a lot of people who will feel, if we get out, if we lose and we're replaced by an administration that takes a look under, lifts up the rock and sees what's been going on, we could be in deep trouble. So I think there will be a large cadre of people at DHS, DOJ, DOD maybe, FBI, who will have a personal stake in staying in. This is one reason authoritarians don't leave power, right? It's not just that they
Mhm.
like power, that's part of it, and they like being the big boss, and they have bad character, and they like being a bully. It's also they feel they can't afford to leave. So I'm very worried about 28. I think you're right to be very alarmed about it, and we should all be alarmed about it, and we should really, therefore, fight him on the things which he's doing to try to make it harder to get rid of him and to curb him in 26 than to get rid of him in 28.
Yeah, when I say to my sort of pro-Trump, or at least I have a kind of run with an evangelical crowd. Evangelical white people are probably the biggest Trump supporters. That's sort of my crowd, and they kind of say, "Well, why are you so much against him?" This and that. I try to explain to them about what I see happening is the Orban model. This
Yes,
isn't like an invasion. I mean, what scares me now is his rich guys are buying up all the media. Okay, like that
right.
CBS. Apparently, they just get, they got all that. They're buying up the media. That's the Orban model. There's basically the stuff with the immigrants, and all. It's basically exactly what Orban did. Would you agree in Hungary? And that's the model that I see happening. It's pretty scary.
Where they still have elections, but there's a huge tilted playing field. No, very much so. And he studied
Russia has
Orban,
elections too, right?
and they've
Yeah,
really studied the Orban model, and we all kind of laughed at it. It's sort of, Hungary is not going to be a model for the U.S. Come on,
right.
it's a tiny little country and all that. But it turns out a lot of the lessons, unfortunately, are They have learned. What's your well, you're out there in Ohio. I'm here inside the Beltway. What do you, is Trump's support among some of his supporters or those who have got along with him eroding? I mean, how much does Epstein matter? How much does some of these other the tariffs? How much does some of just the craziness knocking down the East Wing? Sarah Longwell says in the focus groups that people
Yeah.
who have supported him, some are saying, I thought he would be worrying about me and watching out for me. That was his big selling point. And it's all about him. It doesn't seem to be about helping us. Do you find that some or
Well, as far as the reaction, I definitely feel and think that the kind of the people who could have voted for either way, not the diehard MAGA people. Oh yeah, I think they're kind of just a bit stunned by what's happened. Okay, but as far as the MAGA people go, believe me, I deal with these people. I've had a couple on prominent people on this show here, and I read through the billions that he got from Qatar, the plane, going through all the thing, and they kind of either sit there and don't want to answer the question, or they doesn't bother me. So that's kind of scary. There's a 30% or whatever it is out there that's going to apparently go along with just about anything. So that to me is pretty scary.
yeah, no, it is.
Anyway,
Like the biomedical research, I was talking to someone today. I mean, that's
you know,
just a wound against the U.S. There's no point. I mean, it's not even like that's on behalf of some ideological agenda. I guess Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is kind of an ideological agenda, but it's just nuts,
yeah,
basically. And I feel like that's going to take a long time to put that back together. And I do feel like some of that's penetrating, but you say it's not penetrating to the heart of MAGA. But look, if it peels off 10, 20, 30%, that's obviously very, very important. Yeah.
for sure. Well, Bill, I appreciate so much you being here. Let me just say a word about you. My mother had an expression. She used to say the good Germans, and she was talking about her expression was about people who are good people, but they remain silent in the face of evil. I was pretty supportive and close to our Senator Rob Portman, who helped me when I was kind of in politics. But to me, he and many others, majority of people in my party, Republican Party, have been the good Germans, and that's tragic. And you probably could have gone along with that and maintain your credentials, but you chose not to. You chose to speak up for what was right. I also want to thank you just for personally at different times helping me and supporting me in different ways. So I appreciate what you've done for me. Appreciate what you've done for our country.
Well, that's awfully kind of you, and I appreciate what you've done. And look, I think it might turn. I am generally been very, very worried these last 8, 9, 10 months, but I feel like he's overplayed his hand, and we'll have to really fight hard on all these fronts. But I think I feel a little better than I did 2, 3, 4 weeks ago, honestly.
Well, I'll hang on to that optimistic thought. Thanks again, Bill, so much.
Thanks, Phil.